My stepsister wept, claiming nobody would ever cherish her, then attempted to entice my boyfriend, and my stepmother urged me to relinquish him to her. I, a 24-year-old woman, need to vent about this because I keep questioning whether I'm the one losing my mind. This involves my stepmother Margaret, 52, my stepsister Clara, 22, my father Daniel, 55, and my partner of 3 years, Ethan, 26. To grasp how we reached this point, some background is essential. When I was 8, my biological mother deserted us. One morning, while my father was at work and I was at school, she packed her bags and left. I came home to a note on the kitchen counter explaining she could no longer handle motherhood. My father had to clarify to an 8-year-old why her mother wasn't returning. He raised me solo for 2 years. At 10, my father met Margaret at a parent-teacher conference. Her daughter, Clara, was in my grade but attended a different school. Clara was born with spina bifida and used a wheelchair. Margaret, recently divorced, was working as a substitute teacher to support herself. My father ran a thriving small plumbing company. Margaret started visiting more often, bringing Clara for playdates and eventually staying for meals. I was thrilled to have another girl around, especially one who seemed so sweet. Clara was reserved but always polite to adults, with big eyes that made you want to shield her. My father and Margaret wed when I was 12. Margaret quit her teaching job since my father's business was doing well enough to support us all. We moved to a bigger, wheelchair-accessible house. Margaret managed the household while my father worked long hours. Clara and I shared the upstairs, though she had the room with the stairlift. The early years were pleasant. Margaret ensured I didn't feel sidelined, even though Clara needed more attention due to her medical appointments and therapy. She helped with my schoolwork, attended my soccer matches, and made sure I had everything I needed. Clara and I got along decently. We watched films together, and she aided me with math while I helped her with English. At 15, I met Ethan at a summer camp for disabled children and their siblings, which included activities for both typical and disabled kids. I was there for Clara, and Ethan was there for his autistic younger brother. Ethan, 17, was already working part-time while finishing high school. He was kind to Clara during camp activities, making her laugh often. She seemed more outgoing around him. After camp, Ethan started visiting our home. He bonded with Clara first. She loved chatting with him about books and movies. He treated her like any other teen, not someone to pity. My father approved of him because he was courteous and employed. Margaret seemed pleased that Clara had a new friend. Over the next 2 years, Ethan became a frequent guest. He'd stop by after school and on weekends. Clara always perked up when he arrived. She started asking when he'd visit and got upset if he canceled. I didn't think much of it then. I was busy with high school activities and a part-time job at a clothing shop. In my senior year, things shifted. Ethan began asking me to hang out without Clara sometimes. We started talking more when she wasn't around. He helped me study for my SATs and drove me to job interviews. One spring evening, on the back porch after Clara went inside, he admitted he'd liked me for a while but didn't want to complicate our friendship. We started dating the summer before I went to college. Clara's behavior changed immediately. She became moody and curt with me. When Ethan visited, she demanded his attention and got annoyed if he wanted to spend time with both of us or just me. Margaret noticed and asked me about it. I said I thought Clara had a crush on Ethan. Margaret nodded and promised to talk to her. I went to college 3 hours away while Ethan stayed local, working full-time at an auto shop. Clara started her senior year of high school. On my visits home, Clara was still distant, but Margaret said she was just adjusting to me being at college. Ethan and I managed a long-distance relationship for 2 years. He visited me at school when he could, and I came home for holidays and weekends. It worked well, though the distance was tough. Clara slowly warmed up to me again but acted oddly when Ethan was around. After college, I moved back briefly to job hunt. Ethan and I discussed moving in together once I found steady work. That's when things got strange again. Clara had started community college, taking online classes for easier mobility. She stayed home most of the time, and Margaret worked part-time at the library. Clara kept asking about Ethan, when he was coming over if she could call him, or if he'd like to watch a certain movie with her. One afternoon, Ethan visited while I was at a job interview. When I got home, my father pulled me aside, saying Clara was acting oddly. She suggested they watch a romantic movie and tried to get him to sit closer on the couch. When he kept his distance, she cried, saying no one would love her because of her condition. Ethan felt guilty but said he made an excuse to leave early. I told Margaret that evening. She listened and said she'd handle it. She noted Clara had little social interaction and might not understand boundaries. I accepted this and tried to be more empathetic. 2 weeks later, I started a job at a marketing firm in a nearby town. Ethan and I found an affordable apartment to share. When I told Margaret about our move, her face paled. Clara cried and rushed to her room. My father seemed happy for us, but Margaret was quiet the rest of the night. Over the next month, as Ethan and I prepared to move, Margaret grew distant. She mentioned how I was abandoning my family and how Clara would miss me. Clara alternated between ignoring me and being overly clingy. She started having more medical appointments and complained of pain more often. A week before our move, Clara had what Margaret called a panic attack. She hyperventilated, saying she couldn't handle me leaving. Margaret insisted we delay the move until Clara was more stable. My father backed her up. Ethan was frustrated but agreed to wait a few weeks. Clara's episodes increased over those weeks. Whenever we discussed moving, she'd have breathing issues or severe pain. Margaret scheduled more doctor visits, saying the doctors were worried about Clara's stress. My father asked me to be patient. This went on for 2 months. Every time Ethan and I planned to move, Clara had a medical crisis. Margaret said doctors advised against major changes in Clara's environment. I started suspecting the episodes weren't entirely medical, but felt guilty for thinking so. Last month, Margaret asked for a private talk. She expressed worry about Clara's mental health, saying doctors suggested Ethan's presence calmed her. Margaret asked if Ethan could spend more time at home, maybe even move into our spare room temporarily to help Clara adjust. I told her Ethan was my boyfriend, not Clara's caretaker, and we had our own plans. Margaret's expression shifted. She called me selfish, saying I didn't understand Clara's struggles. She said Clara deserved happiness too, and keeping Ethan from her was cruel. That conversation haunted me for days. When I told Ethan, he was shocked. He said he'd never shown romantic interest in Clara, and Margaret's suggestion made him uneasy. Yesterday, things escalated. Margaret asked me to meet her at a cafe. She seemed nervous, which was unusual. She started by recounting how much she'd done for me, treating me like her own daughter. Then she said something chilling. She revealed Clara was deeply in love with Ethan, and her medical episodes were real but triggered by seeing us together. She said Clara believed Ethan liked her too, but was with me out of duty since we were friends first. Margaret asked me to end things with Ethan. She called it a temporary sacrifice to let Clara see if they were compatible. She promised I could have Ethan back if it didn't work out. She said this was my chance to repay her for years of motherly care. I stared, trying to process her request. I told her Ethan wasn't a toy to be passed around, and he'd never shown romantic interest in Clara. Margaret said men don't always know what they want, and Ethan might surprise himself if he gave Clara a chance. When I refused, Margaret cried, calling me selfish for not understanding Clara's pain. She said Clara might never find love due to her disabilities, but Ethan was kind enough to overlook them. She begged me to think of the family. I left the cafe without responding. I drove to Ethan's workplace and told him everything. His reaction was swift and firm. He called Margaret's request inappropriate and manipulative. He said he had no romantic feelings for Clara and never would. Now, in our new apartment, we finally moved into last week despite the drama. I'm trying to figure out what's next. Margaret keeps calling and texting. My father called this morning, asking why I'm upsetting Margaret and what's so important that I can't compromise for Clara. I haven't told him exactly what Margaret asked because I doubt he'd believe me. Margaret always portrays herself as the reasonable one who just wants everyone happy. I'm also worried about Clara if this all comes out. But I can't stop thinking about Margaret's request. The more I reflect, the more I see it's been building for years. All those times Clara got upset when Ethan and I were together. All the medical crises that conveniently happened when we tried to move forward. Margaret called me selfish for wanting my own life. Am I wrong to refuse Margaret's request? Is there a compromise I'm missing? I love my family, but I don't think I can sacrifice my relationship to make Clara happy. Ethan has been kind to her, but that doesn't mean he owes her a romantic relationship. I keep wondering if I should tell my father what Margaret asked. Part of me thinks he deserves to know, but I'm scared it'll tear our family apart. Margaret has been a good stepmother in many ways, and I don't want to hurt her or Clara unnecessarily. How would you navigate this situation? Update 1. I didn't expect to update so soon, but things took a surprising turn. Thank you to everyone who responded to my initial post. Many suggested I tell my father what Margaret asked, and you were right. After posting, I spent days pondering how to approach it. Margaret kept calling and texting, urging me to reconsider her request. She sent articles about how hard it is for disabled people to find love and the importance of family support. Clara was texting too, but differently. She kept asking when Ethan would visit and if he'd mentioned her. Ethan was getting fed up with the drama. He said it was straining our relationship and we needed boundaries. He suggested I talk to my father and lay everything out. He was right, but I hesitated, fearing the fallout. Last Tuesday, someone forced my hand. I was at work when my father called, upset and confused. He said Margaret told him Ethan and I had split, and Ethan was now interested in Clara. Margaret claimed I was being difficult, interfering with their new relationship. I was stunned and couldn't speak for a moment. My father added that Margaret was worried I was struggling to accept the change and might need time away from the family to cope. He suggested I stay at Ethan's place to let everyone adjust. That's when I realized how far Margaret would go with her lies. She'd planned to force the issue by telling my father it was already done. I told him Margaret lied and Ethan and I were still together. He seemed confused and said he'd talk to Margaret about the mix-up. I left work early and went home. Margaret and Clara were there, silent. I asked Margaret why she told my father Ethan and I broke up. She fidgeted, claiming it was a misunderstanding. She said she was speaking hypothetically about what might happen if I prioritized Clara's needs. Clara sat at the table, looking between us. I could tell she knew what was happening, but I wasn't sure how much Margaret had told her. I asked Clara if Margaret told her Ethan and I had split. She nodded, saying Margaret said Ethan would spend more time with her and less with me. That's when I realized Clara was at least partly in on it. Margaret had been setting her up for the outcome she wanted, likely building her hopes. I asked Clara if she truly thought Ethan had romantic feelings for her. She got defensive, saying Ethan was always kind and had called her beautiful and smart. When I asked when he said those things, Clara described friendly, supportive interactions, not romantic ones. Ethan had never said anything inappropriate, but Margaret had clearly spun his kindness into romantic interest and fed that to Clara. When my father got home, I wanted to speak privately. I told him everything, Margaret's cafe request, her lies about our breakup. He listened silently, his expression growing grim. After I finished, he stayed quiet for a long time. He said he needed Margaret's side before deciding anything. He called her in and asked her to explain. Margaret's story was completely different. She claimed I was harsh to Clara about her feelings for Ethan and threatened to keep him away from the family if she didn't stop crushing on him. She said she only asked me to consider Clara's feelings, not end things with Ethan. She insisted I exaggerated her request. Clara backed Margaret's story. She said I was mean about Ethan and Margaret was just protecting her. She claimed she never asked for Ethan and me to break up, but it hurt when I acted like she couldn't have feelings. My father looked between us, trying to discern the truth. He said it was a messy situation, and we needed to cool off and find a way to get along. He suggested family counseling to improve communication. That's when I realized Margaret had orchestrated the confrontation. She'd prepped Clara with a story painting me as the villain and herself as the caring mother. She'd likely been crafting this narrative for weeks, knowing I'd eventually tell my father. I told him I wouldn't do counseling because Margaret had already shown she'd lie to manipulate things. I said I needed space from a family that treated me this way. My father got angry, accusing me of being dramatic. He said families face tough times and walking away wasn't the answer. He called me stubborn and selfish, like my biological mother. That stung. I'd spent my childhood trying not to be like my mother who left when things got hard. But I realized staying in a situation where I was lied to and manipulated wasn't loyalty. It was enduring abuse. I packed my things and went to Ethan's. That was 2 weeks ago and I haven't returned. My father has called, urging me to come home and sort things out. Margaret sent texts apologizing for the misunderstanding, saying she just wants the best for everyone. Clara texted, asking why I'm being so cruel to the family. But here's what bothers me most. None of them have admitted what really happened. Margaret hasn't owned up to asking me to end things with Ethan. Clara hasn't admitted she hoped I would. My father hasn't acknowledged Margaret's lie about our breakup. Instead, they act like this is a family spat that got out of hand. They want me to come back and act like nothing happened, to restore normalcy. But I can't, knowing what Margaret is capable of and how far she'll go for Clara's wants. Ethan has been supportive throughout. He's made it clear he wants no part in Margaret's schemes and is committed to us. He's offered to talk to my father directly, but I'm not sure it would help. The hardest part is I still love my family, despite everything. Margaret cared for me for years and wasn't always manipulative. Clara is my sister, even if she's handling this poorly. My father raised me and worked hard for us. But I'm starting to see love doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior. Margaret crossed a line asking me to sacrifice my relationship for Clara's happiness. She crossed another by lying to my father and manipulating the situation. I don't know what's next. My father says if I don't come home and resolve things, he'll cut financial support. Margaret and Clara act like I caused this by being selfish and unforgiving. Part of me wonders if I should go back and try to make peace. It'd be easier than dealing with this conflict and uncertainty. But every time I consider it, I recall Margaret in that cafe, asking me to end my relationship so Clara could have Ethan. I remember her lying to my father. I can't return to pretending everything's fine, ignoring Clara's feelings, or accepting Margaret's manipulation as normal family dynamics. So, I'm seeking advice again. How do you rebuild your life when your family turns against you for refusing manipulation? How do you handle guilt for stepping away from people who claim to love you but don't respect your boundaries? Update 2. I wish I could say things got better after my last update, but they worsened before improving. I'm writing from my new apartment with Ethan, and I finally feel like I can breathe. After my last post, I stayed away from my family for nearly 3 weeks. Margaret ramped up her efforts to get me back. She called my workplace, telling my boss there was a family emergency and I needed to go home. I had to explain to my boss there was no emergency and my stepmother was lying. Margaret also contacted my college friends on social media. She told them I was having a mental breakdown and asked them to convince me to return. Several friends called, worried, and I had to clarify the situation. It was embarrassing and stressful. The worst was what she did to Ethan. Margaret got his work number and called his boss, saying Ethan acted inappropriately with a disabled family member and that we were considering charges. Ethan's boss called him in the next day for an awkward talk. Ethan had to explain everything, showing texts proving our committed relationship. Luckily, his boss believed him, seeing it as a family dispute, not a legal issue. But Ethan was shaken, and it showed us how far Margaret would go. That incident made me realize I needed stronger action. I couldn't keep living in limbo while Margaret tried to ruin my relationship and reputation. I decided to write a detailed letter to my father, outlining everything, Margaret's initial request, her lies and manipulations. I told him I loved him but couldn't have a relationship if he kept enabling Margaret. I said I'd maintain contact with him separately from Margaret and Clara, but only if he acknowledged the truth and stopped expecting me to tolerate manipulation. I also wrote to Clara, saying I didn't blame her for liking Ethan, but that her feelings didn't entitle her to interfere in my relationship. I wished her happiness with someone who genuinely wanted her, but that wouldn't be Ethan. I sent both letters and waited. A week later, my father called to meet for coffee. He sounded tired and older. At the meeting, he looked sleep-deprived. He said he'd confronted Margaret about my letter. She initially denied everything, claiming I was lying to turn him against her. But as he pressed for specifics, her story fell apart. He said the turning point was when he asked if she'd told me to break up with Ethan. Margaret admitted she'd suggested I prioritize Clara's happiness, but claimed it was a reasonable family request. When asked why she lied about Ethan and me breaking up, she said she was sparing Clara disappointment, believing I'd come around. She insisted she didn't mean for things to get so complicated. My father apologized for not believing me initially. He said Margaret was so good at seeming reasonable and caring that he'd relied on her judgment over his instincts. He regretted comparing me to my biological mother and wanted to focus on repairing our bond. I told him I appreciated the apology but needed real change to trust him again. I said he had to set boundaries with Margaret about her behavior toward me and Ethan and not expect me to sacrifice my happiness for Clara's needs. He agreed, but asked if I'd give the family another chance to work things out. He said Margaret was sorry and wanted to fix things. He suggested we all sit down for an honest talk. Against my instincts, I agreed to one family meeting. I insisted it be at a neutral location, not their house, with Ethan present. I said if Margaret lied or manipulated during the talk, I'd leave without another chance. The meeting was a disaster. At the restaurant, Margaret gave a rehearsed speech about loving me and apologizing for misunderstandings. But when I pressed her to admit she asked me to break up with Ethan, she wouldn't. She kept saying she only wanted me to consider Clara's feelings or think of the family's needs, avoiding the word breakup despite that being her request. Clara was worse. She accused me of being jealous of her bond with Ethan and keeping them apart because I was insecure. She said Ethan had led her on by being kind, and I was forcing him to deny his feelings. Ethan finally spoke, saying he'd never been romantically interested in Clara and never would be. He'd been kind as a friend and her sister's partner, but she'd misread it. Clara cried, saying Ethan was only saying that because I controlled him. Margaret defended Clara, saying Ethan was cruel to a vulnerable person. She implied Ethan wouldn't reject Clara just because of her disabilities. That's when I knew nothing had changed. Margaret and Clara still believed Ethan secretly wanted Clara, but was blocked by me, the selfish villain. They'd learned nothing from months of conflict. I stood to leave, but my father urged me to stay and keep trying. He said families work through issues, not abandon them when things get tough. I told him I'd tried, but Margaret and Clara refused to face reality. As we left the restaurant, Margaret said she'd never stop fighting for Clara's happiness. She said I could leave like my real mother, but she'd always fight for Clara. That was the final straw. Margaret saw me as an obstacle to Clara's happiness, not a daughter to love and protect. No matter what I did, it wouldn't be enough because Margaret always prioritized Clara. Ethan and I left town the next day. We were already planning to move because Ethan got a better-paying job offer in another city. It gave us a fresh start away from the drama. We've been here 6 weeks, and it's been peaceful. No manipulative calls, no guilt trips about family duty, no one asking me to sacrifice my happiness. Ethan loves his new job, and I found a better marketing role than my last one. My father has called a few times. Our talks are polite but distant. He hopes I'll reconsider Margaret and Clara, but I've made it clear I won't. I told him he's welcome to visit us here if he wants a relationship, but I won't return to face Margaret's manipulation. Margaret sent a final text last week, saying she hoped I was happy leaving my family for a man who'd likely abandon me. She said Clara was heartbroken and blamed me for being selfish and cruel. I blocked her number. I also blocked Clara, who kept texting about how unfair I was and how I was hurting the family by staying away. The thing is, I no longer feel guilty. For years, I believed my role was to be understanding, flexible, and sacrificial for Clara's needs. I thought that's what good sisters and grateful daughters did. But I see now Margaret never saw me as her daughter. She viewed me as a tool for Clara's benefit. When I stopped being useful, she was ready to lie, sabotage my relationship, and harm my reputation. Clara never saw me as a sister. She saw me as a rival for Ethan's attention, then an obstacle to her desires. She went along with Margaret's lies because it suited her. My father was so focused on keeping peace that he sacrificed my well-being to avoid confronting Margaret. He wanted me to keep absorbing her manipulation to avoid conflict. That wasn't love, despite their claims. Love doesn't demand you sacrifice your happiness for someone else's convenience. Love doesn't force you to accept lies and manipulation for family harmony. I'm building a new life with people who truly care about me. Ethan has never asked me to give up anything for him and has never lied or manipulated me. That's what a healthy relationship looks like. I don't know if my father will ever fully understand or if he'll always blame me for breaking the family. But I can't control his choices. I can only control mine. So I choose to surround myself with people who respect and value me. Update 3. I'm writing this final update to close this chapter and address some concerns raised. It's been 6 months since moving with Ethan, and it's the best choice I ever made. Life here is good. Ethan got a promotion, and we're saving for a house. I work at a company where my boss values my skills and doesn't deal with family members calling about fake emergencies. We've made friends with neighbors and joined a hiking group. I never thought I could have such a calm, normal life. My father visited twice. The first visit was tense because he kept mentioning Margaret and Clara, asking if I missed them or would forgive them. He seemed to think I'd had enough time to move on. I explained this wasn't about grudges, but protecting myself from people who'd lie and manipulate to get their way. The second visit was better. My father accepted I wasn't returning and stopped pushing reconciliation. We talked about other things, and it felt like our old father-daughter bond. He said he was proud of the life Ethan and I built, but he also shared things that confirmed I made the right choice. After I left, Clara believed Ethan would realize he missed her and come back. Margaret encouraged this fantasy, suggesting they drive to our new city to surprise him. My father stopped it, but only because he worried about appearances, not because he saw it as inappropriate, despite Ethan's clear stance. Stalking is wrong, regardless of how it looks. Margaret also started telling their social circle I turned against the family because I couldn't handle Clara's happiness. She painted herself as the patient mother of a disabled child bullied by a jealous stepsister. Some believed her, which didn't surprise me. Clara started dating someone from an online disability support group. My father said she seemed happy, and Margaret was thrilled Clara was getting the attention she deserved. Neither saw the irony that Clara found someone once she stopped fixating on Ethan. My father asked if I'd congratulate Clara on her new relationship. I said no. Clara joined Margaret's manipulation and never apologized or owned her role. So, what are your thoughts on this story? Do you agree with what happened, or do you see it differently? Let us know your opinion in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. See you in the next one.